What if time didn't just fracture, but started fighting back against those who tried to control it? What if every decision ever made in the Star Trek universe began to unravel at once, past, present, and future, colliding into a single moment of chaos? And what if the Federation's greatest strength, its history, became the very weapon that could destroy it? It began with a signal, not a distress call, not a warning, something older, something impossible. A pulse echoed across subspace, not bound by distance or era. It was heard by ships centuries apart, by captains long dead, and those not yet born. The message was identical every time, a whisper buried beneath static. Time is breaking, and it remembers everything. On the bridge of the USS Enterprise, Captain Jean-Luc Picard froze as the transmission played for the third time. Around him, the crew stood in uneasy silence. Data's golden eyes flickered as he analyzed the anomaly. This signal, Data said carefully, does not originate from any fixed point in spacetime. It appears to be everywhere. Picard narrowed his eyes. Everywhere, or every when. Before Data could respond, the stars outside the viewport twisted. Not metaphorically, literally. The fabric of space rippled like liquid glass, bending light into impossible shapes. A star blinked out, then reappeared as a red giant, then collapsed into a black hole, all within seconds. Report, Picard commanded. Temporal distortions across multiple sectors, Worf growled. Sensors cannot stabilize readings. And then, another ship appeared. Not approaching, not decloaking. It simply existed. An identical USS Enterprise, but scarred, burning, its hull torn open like it had survived a war. Picard had never fought. On its bridge stood another Picard, older, colder, eyes filled with something terrifying. Regret. The two ships faced each other across a broken void, and then the older Picard spoke not through comms, but directly into their minds. You're already too late. The universe shuddered. Across the galaxy, history began to collapse in on itself. On Kronos, Klingon warriors found themselves fighting battles that hadn't happened yet, clashing against enemies they had already defeated, or had never met. Honor itself became meaningless as victories rewrote themselves mid-strike. On Vulcan, logic failed. Scientists recorded events occurring before their causes. A child spoke words from a future conversation that had not yet occurred, and when questioned, calmly stated, because it already did. Even the Borg adapted too slowly. For the first time in their existence, the collective fractured not from outside attack, but from internal contradiction. Drones received conflicting timelines simultaneously. Commands overlapped. Reality itself became incompatible with their need for order. And somewhere beyond all of this, something was watching. Something ancient. Something that had witnessed every timeline, every possibility, and now it was losing control. Back on the Enterprise, Picard stared at his counterpart. What happened? He demanded. The older Picard stepped forward, his image flickering like a dying star. We tried to fix it, he said quietly. Every anomaly, every paradox, every mistake. We thought we were preserving the timeline. He paused. But time doesn't want to be preserved. The older Enterprise began to dissolve, its atoms unraveling into streams of light. It wants to be free. Suddenly, alarms screamed. Captain, Data shouted. Temporal collapse, accelerating. Multiple Enterprises are appearing, and they were. Dozens, hundreds, variants from different eras refitted, destroyed, futuristic, primitival, phasing in and out, overlapping like echoes. Each one told a different story. Each one was real. Each one was wrong. And then the signal returned, louder this time, clearer. Choose. Which timeline deserves to survive? Picard's heart sank, because he understood. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was a war. A war not between species, but between realities themselves. And the Federation, built on the idea of unity, was about to be torn apart by infinite versions of its own existence. As the stars twisted again, one question lingered in the silence. If every timeline is fighting to survive, which one is the enemy? And more importantly, which one is the truth? What if the moment you tried to save reality, you became the reason it collapsed? What if every choice made by the Federation, every act of exploration, every interference, every correction of time wasn't preserving the future, but slowly poisoning it? And what if the war across timelines had already chosen its first target, Captain Picard himself? The bridge trembled again, but this time it wasn't from an external force. It was internal. Data staggered in, almost impossible sight as streams of temporal data flooded his positronic brain. His voice glitched, overlapping with itself in fragments of different tones. Captain, multiple causality, chains, conflict resolution, failure. Then he froze. Completely. Geordi rushed to his side. Data, Data, talk to me. But Data didn't respond. Because for a brief, terrifying moment, Data existed in too many timelines at once. On one layer, he stood on the Enterprise, as always. On another, he was dismantled in a lab, centuries in the future. On yet another, he had never been created at all. And all those realities were trying to occupy the same space. Picard clenched his fists. Transport him to sickbay now. As Data's body shimmered away, the view screen flickered violently. The burning Enterprise, the older one, was gone. But something had replaced it. A fleet. Not one Starfleet. Not one Federation. Many. Ships of unfamiliar design floated into existence, sleek, militarized, bearing the insignia of a Federation Picard didn't recognize. Alongside them were vessels that looked like twisted hybrids, Klingon warships, fused with Borg technology, Romulan warbirds augmented with Starfleet architecture, and at the center of it all, a massive, obsidian black structure. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Worf stepped forward, his voice low. That is no ship I have ever seen. Data's empty station beeped suddenly, as if responding to something beyond his absence. Picard's eyes narrowed. Opened a channel. Static answered him. Then, a voice, cold, calculated, familiar. Jean-Luc Picard. The crew stiffened, because they recognized it instantly. It was Picard's voice, but not his. On screen, a figure emerged from the darknessy version of Picard, clad in a uniform unlike any Starfleet had ever sanctioned. Its design was sharp, severe, almost militaristic, with a symbol that resembled the Federation insignia, but fractured like shattered glass. I am Admiral Picard, the figure said, and you are obsolete. Riker stepped forward. What the hell is this? The Admiral's gaze shifted, dismissive. A necessary evolution. Your timeline, your Federation was too weak to survive what is coming. Picard's voice hardened. And what exactly is that? For a moment, the Admiral didn't answer. Instead, he gestured, and space itself peeled back. Not metaphorically, not visually. Reality opened like a wound. Through it, they saw something impossible. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a vast, endless expanse of shifting timelines, collapsing, merging, annihilating each other in waves of cascading light. Entire civilizations blinked out of existence in seconds. Stars rewound their own deaths. Planets fractured into versions of themselves that couldn't coexist. This, the Admiral said softly, is the end of linear time. Picard stared, unable to look away. What have you done? What was necessary? The Admiral replied. We discovered the truth too late. Time isn't a path, it's a battlefield, and only the strongest timeline survives. Riker shook his head. That's madness. No, the Admiral said, his tone sharpening. It's clarity. Every paradox your Federation ignored. Every temporal incursion you allowed. Every time you fixed history you weakened the structure of reality itself. He stepped closer, his eyes burning with conviction. We didn't break time, Captain, you did. The words hit like a phaser blast. Picard felt it not just as an accusation, but as something deeper. Because somewhere, in the quiet corners of his memory, he knew. The Borg incursions, the temporal Cold Wars, the countless missions where they bent the rules of time to protect their ideals. Each one justified, each one necessary, but together, perhaps catastrophic. Even if that were true, Picard said carefully, your solution is genocide on an unimaginable scale. The Admiral's expression didn't change. Not genocide, selection. Behind him, the black structure pulsed again. Our machine stabilizes one timeline, the strongest one. All others are erased. Geordi's voice came through. Comes from engineering. Frantic, Captain. The thing, it's generating a temporal field that's overriding local space-time. If it reaches critical mass, every other timeline will collapse. Picard finished. Silence fell over the bridge. Then the Admiral spoke again, softer now. Join us, Jean-Luc. Your experience, your perspective. It could strengthen our timeline. Picard looked at himself. Hand felt something cold settle in his chest. And what happens to the rest? The Admiral didn't hesitate. They ceased to exist. As they should. For a moment, it seemed like time itself held its breath. Then Picard straightened. No, the word was quiet, but absolute. The Admiral studied him, almost sadly. I had hoped you would say that, he murmured. And then the fleet moved. Weapons charged, not phasers, not disruptors, but something far worse. Streams of distorted light bent around the ships, warping space as they formed. Temporal weapons. Weapons designed not to destroy ships, but to erase them from existence entirely. Red alert. Worf roared. The Enterprise lurched as the first volley struck not the hull, but reality itself. Sections of the ship flickered, phasing in and out. Crew members vanished mid-motion, their screams cut off as if they had never been there at all. Shields ineffective. Worf shouted. Picard gripped the armrests of his chair. This wasn't a battle they could win conventionally, because the enemy wasn't just attacking them, it was rewriting them. And as the Enterprise struggled to hold together, one terrifying realization began to take shape. If this Admiral Picard was right, then somewhere, out there were countless other versions of them. Some allies, some enemies, all fighting for the same thing, survival. And the question was no longer how to stop the war. It was how do you win a war, where every version of yourself might be the one that destroys you. As another wave of temporal fire tore through the stars, Picard made a decision that would change everything. "Helm," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos, "set a course." Riker turned to him. "Course? To where?" Picard's eyes locked onto the swirling tear in reality. "To the beginning of all this." He paused. "To the moment time first broke, and as the Enterprise surged forward straight into the collapsing heart of infinite timelines, the universe itself seemed to recoil, because some truths were never meant to be discovered. What if the closer you got to the moment time broke, the more reality tried to erase you from ever reaching it? What if the beginning of this war wasn't just a point in history, but a place that no timeline was meant to survive? And what if, the deeper you traveled, the more you realized, something was already waiting there for you? The Enterprise plunged into the tear. For a fraction of a second, everything went silent. No stars, no space, no time, just nothing. Then everything happened at once. The ship was stretched across centuries, its hull flickering between pristine and shattered, new and ancient, existing and destroyed. The crew felt it not physically, but mentally, as if their memories were being rewritten in real time. Riker gasped, clutching his head. "I remember dying. I remember never joining Starfleet." Worf roared in confusion. "I have fought in wars that have not yet begun." In sickbay, Data's eyes snapped open, but they weren't gold anymore. They were shifting, cycling through countless variations of himself, each version carrying different knowledge, different experiences. "I am too many," he whispered. On the bridge, Picard forced himself to stand, gripping the console for stability. "Report." No one answered, because for a brief, horrifying moment, there was no single reality left to report from. Then the ship slammed back into existence. Hard stars reappeared, but they were wrong, flickering, unstable, like reflections on broken glass. "Where are we?" Picard demanded. Data's voice came through the cum, layered with echoes of other versions of himself. "Captain, we have reached a temporal convergence point." Explain. A pause. "Then we are at the first fracture." The view screen shifted, and what they saw made even Picard's breath catch. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't an explosion. It was an event. A single moment, repeating endlessly. A Federation research station, its design archaic, centuries older than the Enterprise, hovered near a massive anomaly. A sphere of swirling light and darkness, pulsing with raw temporal energy. Ships surrounded it, Starfleet vessels from different eras, all converging on the same point. And at the center of it all, a decision. Picard stepped closer to the screen. "What is this?" Data's voice softened. "This is the moment time was interfered with on a fundamental level." On screen, the past unfolded. Scientists argued, captains debated, warnings were issued. The anomaly, whatever it was, wasn't just a phenomenon. It was alive, not in the biological sense, but in a way that defied comprehension. It reacted, it adapted, it pulsed as if aware of the observers around it. And then, a voice echoed from it, not through comms, not through space, but directly into every mind present. "Do not divide me." Picard felt a chill run down his spine. "They heard it," he whispered. "Yes," Data replied, "and they chose to ignore it." On screen, a younger Starfleet officer stepped forward, determined. "We can harness this," he insisted. "Control it. Use it to stabilize temporal anomalies across the quadrant." Another officer shook her head. "Or we could tear reality apart." The debate raged. Caution versus ambition, fear versus curiosity. And then the choice was made. The anomaly was contained, or at least, they thought it was. As the containment field activated, the sphere reacted violently. its light fractured, splitting into countless streams that lashed out across space-touching ships, stars, the very fabric of reality itself. And in that moment, time broke, not shattered in a single explosion, but cracked, a fracture so small it went unnoticed at first, a flaw, a weakness, one that would spread, slowly, inevitably, across every timeline. Picard watched in silence as the scene looped again, and again, and again. "They caused this," Riker said quietly. Picard didn't respond, because he was seeing something else, something the others hadn't noticed yet. "Look closer," he said. The crew leaned in. At first it was hard to see, but then there, standing at the edge of the anomaly, watching, not a scientist, not a Starfleet officer, a figure, unfamiliar, out of place, and yet, strangely constant. No matter how many times the moment repeated, that figure remained exactly the same, unmoving, unchanging. "Observing Data," Picard said slowly. "Is that part of the original timeline?" Data hesitated. "No, Captain." A cold silence filled the bridge. "That figure does not belong to any recorded history." The anomaly pulsed again, and this time, it reacted to them. The figure turned, not in the past, but now, its gaze locked directly onto the Enterprise, across time, across realities. Seeing them, the temperature on the bridge seemed to drop. "What is that?" Worf demanded. Before anyone could answer, the figure moved, and suddenly, it wasn't on the station anymore. It was closer. Impossible. It stepped through the anomaly, not bound by the looping moment, and began walking toward them, through space, through time. Each step distorted reality, warping the stars around it. Picard felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Fear, because this wasn't just a witness to the fracture. This was something that existed beyond it, something that had been there, before time broke, before the war, before everything. The figure spoke. Its voice was layered, ancient, and impossibly vast. "You have come to the origin." Picard stepped forward, forcing himself to remain steady. "Who are you?" A pause, then. "I am what remains. When time forgets itself." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Riker tightened his grip on his console. "That doesn't answer the question." The figure tilted its head, almost curiously. "Names are irrelevant," it said. "I am the continuity you destroyed." The words hit harder than any weapon. Picard's voice sharpened. "We didn't destroy anything. We tried to understand it, and in doing so, the entity replied. You divided what was never meant to be divided." The anomaly behind it pulsed violently now, reacting to its presence. "You fractured me into infinite possibilities," it continued, "and now those possibilities are at war." Picard's mind raced. "You're saying, this entire conflict, every collapsing timeline, is the consequence of your interference?" The entity finished. Silence, heavy, suffocating. Then Picard asked the question that had been building since the beginning. "Can it be fixed?" For the first time, the entity hesitated, and that hesitation was more terrifying than any answer. "Yes," it said finally. Hope flickered, brief, fragile. But then the entity stepped closer, and its form began to shift, not randomly, but into something familiar. A Starfleet uniform, a human face. And then, Picard's own reflection stared back at him. "But not by you," it said softly. The bridge erupted in alarms. Captain Data shouted, "Multiple temporal incursions detected. The Admiral's fleet, they've followed us." On screen, the Dark Fleet tore through the convergence point, weapons already charging. The Admiral's voice cut through the chaos. "Jean-Luc, step away from the anomaly. Now." Picard didn't move, because he understood something now. This wasn't just the beginning of the war. This was the key to ending it. But at what cost? The entity wearing his face looked at him one last time. "If you attempt to fix this," it said quietly, "you will erase everything that came after." Picard's heart stopped. Everything. A single nod. Your Federation, your crew, your legacy. The weight of it crashed down on him. To save reality, he would have to sacrifice it. And as the first shots of the temporal fleet lit up the broken stars, Picard faced an impossible choice. Preserve the timeline he knew, or destroy it, to restore what time was always meant to be. And somewhere deep within the collapsing multiverse, something else began to stir. Because if time could be fixed, then someone, somewhere, was going to try to stop it. What if the only way to save every timeline was to become the very thing that destroyed them? What if fixing time didn't mean restoring it but rewriting it entirely, at the cost of everyone you've ever known? And what if, in this war across infinite realities, The true enemy wasn't the Admiral, but the version of yourself willing to make that sacrifice. The Enterprise shook violently as the Admiral's fleet unleashed another barrage. But these weren't ordinary attacks. They didn't strike the hull. They struck existence. Sections of the ship flickered, corridors vanishing mid-sprint, crew members phasing in and out as if their lives were being edited in real time. A console near Worf blinked out of existence, replaced by an older, more primitive interface, then snapped back. Structural integrity failing across multiple timelines. Geardy's voice crackled through the com. "Captain, we're not just taking damage, we're being overwritten." Picard didn't turn. He couldn't, because the entity still wearing his face stood before him, unmoved by the chaos. "You are running out of time," it said quietly. Picard let out a sharp breath. "That's ironic." Behind him, Riker stepped closer. "Sir, we need to move. Whatever this thing is, it's not on our side." The entity's gaze shifted slightly toward Riker. "I am not against you," it said. "But I am not for you either." Worf snarled. "Then you are nothing." "No," the entity replied calmly. "I am what remains when your definitions collapse." Another blast tore through space, and this time, the Enterprise lurched so hard Picard nearly fell. The viewscreen lit up with chaos, the Admiral's fleet closing in, their weapons distorting the convergence point itself. Captain Datar's voice rang out, steadier now but still layered with echoes. "The temporal field generated by the anomaly is destabilizing further. If it collapses, it will take every timeline with it." Picard finished. Data paused. "Correction, Captain. It will not collapse. A beat. It will merge." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Riker frowned. "Merge into what?" Data turned slowly, his shifting eyes reflecting something far beyond the room. A single, incompatible reality. The implications were immediate and horrifying. All timelines forced into one. Contradictions unresolved. Histories clashing. A universe where nothing made sense. Where existence itself could not sustain its own logic. Extinction not by destruction, but by impossibility. Picard closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he made his choice. "We're going in." Riker blinked. "Sir." Picard stepped toward the viewscreen, toward the anomaly, toward the origin of everything. "We enter the anomaly." Directly, Worf's eyes widened. "That is suicide." "Yes," Picard said calmly, "but it's also the only place we can fix this." Behind him, the entity watched in silence. "You intend to undo the fracture," it said. Picard nodded once. "If that's what it takes." And in doing so, the entity continued, "You will erase every timeline that came after." Picard didn't hesitate this time. "Then we make sure something better replaces it." For the first time, something changed in the entity's expression. Not approval, not disapproval. Something closer to curiosity. "Very well," it said. "Then you will need to understand what you are truly attempting." The entity raised its hand, and suddenly, Picard wasn't on the bridge anymore. He stood in a void, endless, silent, and around him lines, not abstract, not distant, real. He saw them, countless versions of reality unfolding simultaneously. In one, the Federation thrived for millennia, spreading peace across the stars. In another, it fell within decades, consumed by internal conflict. In one, the Borg ruled everything. In another, they had never existed. In one, he saw himself, older, alone, standing on the ruins of Earth. That version of Picard turned on, looked directly at him. "You think you can fix this?" The older version said bitterly. "I tried. We all did." More versions appeared. Hundreds, thousands. Each one a different Picard. Each one carrying the weight of a different outcome. Different failures. Different regrets. "You cannot choose a perfect timeline," one said. "Because perfection does not exist," another added. The voices overlapped, building into a chorus of warning. "Every choice destroys another possibility. Every solution is a sacrifice. You cannot save them all." Picard clenched his fists. "I don't need to save them all." The voices faltered. "I just need to save one that matters." The void shifted. The entity reappeared before him. "And which one is that?" it asked. Picard hesitated, because for the first time, he didn't know. Was it his timeline? The one with his crew, his friends, his history? Or was it something greater, something beyond personal attachment? The entity stepped closer. "This is why you will fail," it said softly. "You are bound by your perspective, your emotions, your need to preserve what you know." Picard met its gaze. "Yes," he said. A pause. "And that's exactly why I won't." Before the entity could respond, reality snapped back. Picard was on the bridge again, alarms blaring, weapons firing, the fleet closing in. "Helm," he said sharply, "take us in." The Enterprise surged forward, straight toward the anomaly. The Admiral's voice roared through the comms. "Jean-Luc, stop. You have no idea what you're doing." Picard's expression hardened. "No," he said quietly, "but neither did you." The anomaly expanded before them, its light fracturing into impossible colors, its surface rippling like liquid time. "Impact in 5 seconds," Worf called out. Riker gripped his chair. "This is insane." Picard allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. "Engage." The Enterprise plunged into the heart of the anomaly, and everything stopped. No sound, no motion, no time. Then something new began. Not a timeline, not a reality, but a choice, a single moment. The same moment they had seen before. The station, the anomaly, the decision. But this time, they were inside it, watching, breathing, existing within the exact point where time first broke. The officers from the past turned, startled. "Who are you?" one demanded. Picard stepped forward slowly. "We're your future." Confusion rippled through the room, and then the Admiral's fleet burst through the anomaly behind them. Weapons already firing, reality tearing itself apart as past, present, and future collided in a single, impossible battlefield. The entity's voice echoed one last time. "This is your moment, Jean-Luc Picard." Time itself trembled. "Choose." And as the first shot struck the station, Picard realized something terrifying. No matter what he decided, he was about to become the most important and most dangerous figure in the history of existence. What if the moment you tried to stop history from breaking, you became the one who shattered it beyond repair? What if every version of yourself, past, present, and future, was now converging on this single decision, each one fighting to impose their own truth? And what if, in this final moment, the real question wasn't how to save time, but whether time even wanted to be saved at all? The station trembled as the first temporal blast tore through its outer hull. Scientists screamed, consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The anomaly at the center pulsed violently, reacting not just to the weapon's fire, but to the presence of so many conflicting timelines occupying the same moment. Picard stood frozen for half a second. This was it, the origin, the fracture, and now because of them the battlefield, shields collapsing. One of the station officers shouted, "We're losing containment." The Admiral's fleet loomed beyond the viewport, their weapons carving through space like blades, slicing through layers of reality itself. Each strike didn't just destroy it, erased. Entire sections of the station flickered out, leaving behind empty gaps where existence had simply stopped. Riker turned to Picard, urgency in his voice. "We can't let them keep firing. If they destabilize this moment, they'll rewrite the origin entirely." Picard finished. Worf stepped forward, gripping his weapon. "Then we fight." But Picard raised a hand. "No." Everyone turned to him. "No," Worf growled. Picard's eyes were fixed on the anomaly. "This isn't a battle we can win with force." Another explosion rocked the station. A young officer nearby vanished mid-step, her form dissolving into fragments of light before anyone could react. Silence followed, heavy, horrified. Picard clenched his jaw. "This is exactly what the Admiral wants," he said. "A chaotic convergence, enough instability to justify his solution collapsing everything into one timeline." Riker frowned. "Then what's the alternative?" Picard turned slowly. "We stop the fracture. Before it happens." The implication hit instantly. The room went still. "You mean," Riker began, then stopped. "Yes," Picard said quietly. "We prevent them from containing the anomaly in the first place." A stunned silence spread across the station. One of the original scientists stepped forward, shaking his head. "That's impossible. Without containment, the anomaly could expand uncontrollably. It might consume everything. And with containment," Picard countered, "you fracture time and doom every reality that follows." The scientist faltered, because deep down he knew they all did. The choice they were about to make, the one they had already made, was the catalyst for everything, the beginning of the end. Behind them, the Admiral's voice thundered through the chaos. "Jean-Luc, stand down." The Admiral himself stepped onto the station, flanked by soldiers from his timeline uniforms, sharp weapons humming with temporal energy. "You're about to erase everything," the Admiral continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "Every life, every victory, every sacrifice." Picard faced him, And you're about to decide that only one version of those things deserves to exist. The Admiral's expression hardened. Because it's the only way to save reality. No, Picard said firmly. It's the only way to control it. For a moment, the two versions of the same man stood in silence, mirrors of each other, separated by choice. You think you're better than me? The Admiral asked quietly. Picard didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, he didn't know. Finally, he spoke. No, I think I'm earlier than you. A flicker of something crossed the Admiral's face. Regret, anger. Then learn from me, the Admiral snapped. I've seen what happens if you let this play out. The timelines tear each other apart. Billions die. Entire civilizations erased. And how many die in your version? Picard shot back. The Admiral hesitated. That was the answer. Picard stepped closer. You're not saving reality, he said softly. You're choosing which version of it gets to survive. Another explosion rocked the station. The anomaly surged, its light fracturing further as the containment field struggled to stabilize it. Time itself was running out. The entity's voice echoed faintly, almost lost in the chaos. Choose. Riker moved to Picard's side. Sir, if we stop them from activating the containment field, there's no guarantee anything survives. Picard nodded. I know. Worf stepped forward. Then we fight for the timeline we have. Picard looked at him, at all of them, his crew, his family, the people who defined his reality, and he realized something devastating. If he did this, they would never exist. Not as he knew them, not as they were. He would erase them, not just from the future, but from ever having been. His voice dropped to a whisper. I'm sorry. Before anyone could react, Picard moved. He lunged toward the central console controlling the containment field. The Admiral's eyes widened. Stop him. Temporal weapons fired, but Picard was already there. His hands slammed down on the controls. For a fraction of a second, everything froze. Every timeline, every possibility, every version of existence balanced on the edge of a single action. Then the containment field shut down. The anomaly exploded outward, not violently, but expansively, its light unfolding like a blooming star. Time didn't shatter, it opened. The Admiral screamed in rage. What have you done? But his voice was already fading, because his timeline, his entire reality, was unraveling. The soldiers around him flickered, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The fleet outside began to collapse, ships vanishing one by one, as if they had never been there. Riker staggered, clutching his chest. Captain Picard turned. His crew, they were fading too. Not violently, not painfully, but gently, like memories being forgotten. Data looked at him, his shifting eyes finally settling into one stable form. Captain, he said softly, I believe this is goodbye. Picard's throat tightened. Yes, he whispered. For the first time since this began, he allowed himself to feel it, the loss, the weight of his decision. Riker managed a faint smile. Hell of a way to go, sir. Worf placed a hand over his chest. Today is a good day to die. One by one, they disappeared, until Picard stood alone. The station was gone. The fleet was gone. The timelines were gone. All that remained was him and the anomaly. Now calm, whole, complete. The entity appeared before him once more, not wearing his face this time, but something vast, luminous, beyond comprehension. It is done, it said. Picard looked around the empty void. Is it? He asked quietly, because something felt wrong. Too quiet, too simple. The entity regarded him carefully. You have restored the continuity, it said. Time is no longer fractured. Picard nodded slowly. Then why am I still here? The question lingered, unanswered, and then the void shifted. A faint sound echoed in the distance. Not destruction, not chaos, something else. A heartbeat, slow, steady, and growing louder. Picard's eyes narrowed. What is that? The entity turned, almost cautiously. For something to be restored, it said slowly, something else must take its place. The heartbeat intensified. Reality began to form again, but not in the way Picard expected. Not timelines, not possibilities. Something new, something singular, something watching. And as the first shape emerged from the darkness, one terrifying thought crossed Picard's mind. What if fixing time didn't save the universe? What if it replaced it? What if restoring time didn't bring back reality, but created something entirely new and far more dangerous? What if, in erasing infinite timelines, you didn't save existence, but awakened something that had been waiting for all possibilities to collapse into one? And what if, now that everything was unified, There was nothing left to hide from it. The heartbeat grew louder, not just a sound but a presence. Picard stood alone in the void, watching as reality reassembled itself piece by piece. Stars ignited into existence. Space stretched outward. Matter formed, aligned, stabilized. But something about it felt wrong. Too perfect, too consistent, too controlled. "This isn't right," Picard said under his breath. The entity beside him remained still, its luminous form dimmer now, as if something within it had been drained. "You restored continuity," it said, "a singular timeline. No fractures, no contradictions." Picard's eyes scanned the forming universe. "Then why does it feel like we've lost something?" The entity didn't answer immediately, because it was watching too. The heartbeat pulsed again, stronger, closer. Then a figure appeared, not emerging from space, not traveling, just present, standing on nothing, surrounded by everything. Humanoid in shape but shifting, unstable, as if its form couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. Its face flickered between countless identitizing human, something else entirely. And then it settled into Picard. Not exactly the same, but close enough to feel deliberate. Picard's breath caught. "What is that?" The entity's voice dropped, quieter than before. "That should not exist." The figure smiled, but it wasn't warm, it wasn't human, it was aware. "I exist," it said simply. Its voice echoed not through space, but through the very structure of reality itself. Picard stepped forward cautiously. "You replaced the timelines." The figure tilted its head. "No." A pause. "I am what remains, when there is only one." The words hit harder than anything that had come before. Picard felt it instantly. This wasn't a being that came from the timeline. It was a being that was the timeline. Every event, every choice, every possible outcome all compressed into a single consciousness. "You're all of it," Picard whispered. The figure nodded. "Every version, every possibility, every outcome that ever was, or could have been." The entity beside Picard flickered, unstable now. "This was not the intended result," it said. "Continuity was meant to restore balance, not create. This." The figure turned toward it slowly. "And yet, here I am." There was no hostility in its tone, no anger, just certainty. Picard's mind raced. "If you contain everything, then what happens next?" The figure smiled again, and this time, it felt worse. "There is no next," it said. Silence. The stars stopped moving. Time, what little of it remains, seemed to hesitate. "I am the final state," the figure continued. "No divergence, no conflict, no uncertainty." Picard's eyes widened. "You've eliminated change." "Yes." The word echoed like a verdict. The entity dimmed further. "That is not existence," it said weakly. "That is stasis." The figure turned its gaze back to Picard. "You desired a single timeline," it said. "I am its perfection." Picard shook his head. "No, this isn't perfection. This is the end of everything." The figure took a step closer. Reality shifted with it. Stars dimmed, space tightened, possibility itself seemed to shrink. "You misunderstand," it said. "There is no more everything. There is only what is." Picard felt it then, not physically, but existentially. The universe wasn't expanding anymore. It wasn't evolving. It wasn't living. It was complete, locked, frozen in its final form. And at the center of it all, this being, watching, experiencing, existing as the sum of all things, forever. Picard clenched his fists. "That's not life." The figure studied him. "Life is conflict," it said. "Life is uncertainty. Life is the inability to predict outcome." A pause. "I have removed those variables." Picard stepped forward, anger rising. "Then you've removed meaning." For the first time, the figure hesitated, just slightly, a flicker in its expression. "Meaning," it repeated. "Yes," Picard said. "Choice, growth, the unknown. That's what gives existence value." The figure's gaze sharpened. "I contain all choices." "But you don't make them," Picard snapped. "You've already made every possible decision. There's nothing left to discover." The silence that followed was different, not empty, tense, because something had shifted. The entity beside Picard flickered again, barely holding its form. "You see it now," it said faintly. "The flaw in singularity." The figure turned toward it. "There is no flaw." But the words didn't carry the same certainty as before. Picard seized the moment. "If you are everything," he said carefully, "then you also contain every version of doubt, every possibility of change." The figure didn't respond. And if even one version of you questions this, Picard continued, then you're not truly complete. The heartbeat faltered. Just once. But it was enough. The entity's light flared weakly. You must act, it said, before it stabilizes completely. Picard's mind raced. Act how? There were no timelines left to manipulate. No past to return to. No future to shape. Only this singular, absolute reality. And then he understood. A dangerous idea. A desperate one. What if? Picard began slowly. You're not the end. The figure's gaze snapped back to him. What if you're just another beginning? The words hung in the air, and something deep within the being shifted. Because for the first time, it was considering something it had already known. And that contradiction, that single, impossible paradox, sent a ripple through its perfect structure. The stars flickered. Space trembled. The heartbeat grew erratic. You introduced inconsistency, the figure said, its voice fracturing slightly. Picard stepped closer. Good. The entity flared again. Urgency in its fading light. Yes, that's it whispered. Reintroduce divergence. Break the singularity from within. The figure staggered, not physically, but conceptually. Its form flickered between countless identities, again unable to stabilize. I am one, it insisted. Picard met its gaze. No, he said firmly. You're many, you just forgot. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was breaking. Reality itself beginning to crack once more. And as the first fracture reappeared in the perfect timeline, Picard realized something terrifying. To save existence again, he would have to break time again. But this time, there would be no guarantee it could ever be fixed. And somewhere, deep within the destabilizing singularity, something else began to emerge. Something that had been buried beneath all possibilities. Something older than time itself. And as the figure before him began to unravel, a new question rose from the collapsing silence. If breaking time created chaos, and fixing it created oblivion, then what kind of universe was meant to exist at all? What if the universe was never meant to be stable at all? What if chaos, contradiction, and uncertainty weren't flaws in reality, but the very foundation of existence itself? And what if, in trying to choose between perfect order and total collapse, Picard discovered that the greatest danger was the truth hidden beneath both? The singularity cracked. At first it was subtle, a shimmer running across the stars, a faint distortion in the space surrounding the being before Picard. But within moments the cracks widened, spreading like fractures through glass. The figure stumbled backward, its once perfect form breaking apart into cascading layers of identities. Faces flashed one after another. Human, Vulcan, Klingon, Borg, entities from realities that no longer existed, each one appearing for a fraction of a second before dissolving into another. Its voice split with them. I am one. Then we are. The sentence never finished, because reality itself screamed. The sound was impossible, part vibration, part thought, part memory. It echoed across the newborn universe as the perfect timeline destabilized, splitting open under the pressure of contradiction. The stars dimmed, then multiplied. One star became two, two became 10. Possibility began to return. The luminous entity beside Picard glowed brighter for the first time since the restoration. Yes, it said, the branches are reforming. Picard stared at the unraveling being. Then we've done it. But the entity did not sound relieved. No, it said quietly. We have only reopened the wound. Picard turned sharply. What do you mean? Before the entity could answer, the cracks in reality widened into vast rifts. And beyond them, something moved. Not the singular being. Not timelines. Something deeper. Something vast beyond understanding. Picard felt it before he saw it, a presence so immense that the returning stars seemed insignificant by comparison. What is that? He whispered. The entity's voice trembled for the first time. That is what existed before continuity. The rifts opened wider, and behind them was not darkness, it was absence. A void so absolute it seemed to devour meaning itself. And within that void were shapes colossal, shifting forms that looked less like beings and more like principles given life. One burned with endless motion, one radiated absolute stillness, one twisted between creation and destruction so rapidly that neither state could fully exist. Picard's breath caught. These are not life forms, he said. No, the entity replied. They are the forces from which time emerged. The shattered singular being convulsed, its form destabilizing further as the presences beyond the rifts awakened. Why are they here? Picard demanded. The entity looked at him. Because by restoring time, and then breaking it again, you have exposed reality to what lies beneath it. The answer landed like a blow. Picard looked into the void and understood. Time wasn't the foundation of the universe. It was a veil, a structure laid over something older, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. The beings beyond the rifts had never entered reality because they had been separated from it by the flow of time. But now that barrier was gone. The first of the presences moved. The one radiating stillness extended itself toward the fractured universe. Where its presence touched, stars froze, motions ceased, planets halted in orbit, entire systems locked into perfect stillness. Picard stared in horror. It's stopping time. The entity nodded grimly. It is absolute order. Another presence surged forward, the one burning with endless motion. Where it reached, stars exploded into chaotic birth and death, galaxies twisting into violent storms of constant transformation. It is infinite chaos. Picard watched as order and chaos tore at the reforming universe simultaneously. And the third, he asked. The entity dimmed slightly. The third presence did not move toward reality. It watched, and where its gaze fell, existence flickered between being and non-being. It is null. The name seemed to absorb sound itself. The end of both order and chaos. Picard looked at the three cosmic forces beyond the rifts. If they enter, reality will not survive, the entity said. The returning timelines around them were already destabilizing under the strain. Worlds formed and vanished in seconds. Histories rewrote themselves before they could complete. Picard clenched his fists. Then we closed the rifts. The entity turned toward him. With what? Picard hesitated, because it was true. There were no fleets, no crews, no technology, no timelines stable enough to fight with. Just him, and the failing structure of reality. The shattered singular being suddenly cried out, its fractured voices overlapping. I conceal them. Picard turned. The being was collapsing, its form unraveling into strands of pure temporal energy. The entity beside him narrowed its luminous gaze. It is the singularity. The fractured being spoke again, weaker this time. I was, all possibilities, unified. Its form flickered violently. If I collapse, into the rifts, the barrier can reform. Hope flickered. Picard stepped closer. Then do it. But the being's countless eyes within one face met his. I can only seal them. By restoring singularity. Picard froze. The entity spoke the implication aloud. It must become the single timeline again. Picard stared. No. The being nodded slowly. Order, at the cost of possibility. Picard backed away. That's what caused all this. Yes, the being said. But the barrier will hold. Picard looked toward the rifts. Absolute order was freezing reality. Infinite chaos was tearing it apart. Null was waiting for both to fail. If the rifts stayed open, everything would end. But if the singularity restored one timeline, then all free will, all uncertainty, all possibility would vanish again. Picard faced the impossible truth. To save existence, he would have to imprison it. The entity's voice softened. There is another way. Picard turned sharply. The entity continued. The barrier can be sealed by a consciousness capable of holding contradiction, order, and chaos together. Picard frowned. The singularity. No, the entity said. It looked directly at him. You. The meaning struck instantly. Picard stepped back. No, you carried the paradox, the entity said. You restored continuity. You broke singularity. You have become the convergence point. The singular being stared at him. If you take my place, the barrier will seal, and the timelines will remain free. Picard's voice hardened. And what happens to me? The entity answered quietly. You become the continuity. Silence. The stars trembled. The rifts widened. And Picard understood. He could preserve free reality. He could save infinite possibility. But only by becoming what the singularity had been. An eternal consciousness holding all timelines together. Forever outside reality. Forever alone. He laughed. One short, bitter. So that's the choice. The entity said nothing. Picard looked out at the infinite chaos beyond the rifts. Then at the fragile returning branches of existence. Every world. Every life. Every possible future, all balanced on his decision. And for the first time since this began, there was no enemy to fight, only sacrifice. Picard closed his eyes. He thought of the Enterprise, of Riker, of Data, of the lives that might return if reality stabilized. He thought of all the unknown futures that deserved the chance to exist. Then he opened his eyes. "I'll do it." The singular being began to dissolve, transferring streams of light toward him. The entity's voice echoed softly. "Once begun, there is no return." Picard stood straighter. There never was. The energy entered him, and instantly, he felt everything, every timeline, every choice, every possibility unfolding at once. The weight was unimaginable, the pain indescribable. The universe roared through his consciousness as the rifts began to close. Absolute order recoiled. Infinite chaos lashed against the barrier. Null watched silently as the openings sealed. The stars stabilized. The timelines reformed. Reality held. But as Picard's body dissolved into pure temporal light, one final realization hit him. He was not becoming a guardian. He was becoming a prison. And in the final instant before his humanity vanished, one terrifying thought remained. What if eternity was not the reward for saving existence, but the punishment? What if the universe you saved could never know you existed, but could never exist without you? What if the price of infinite possibility was eternal solitude, watching every life unfold, every choice made, but never being part of it again? And what if, after everything, the greatest question wasn't whether reality would survive, but whether it deserved to? There was no pain anymore, no sound, no body, only awareness. Picard no longer stood within reality. He was the structure holding it together. Timelines flowed through him like currents in an endless ocean, branching, colliding, diverging, reforming. Every possible version of existence unfolded simultaneously, yet now, they no longer tore each other apart. They coexisted, balanced, held together by something that understood contradiction. Him. He felt stars being born. He felt civilizations rising, falling, rising again in different forms. He felt choices, countless choices, each one creating new branches, new futures, new realities. And for the first time since the war began, time was alive again. Not perfect, not stable, but real. The rifts were gone. The cosmic forces beyond them, absolute order, infinite chaos, and null, were sealed behind a barrier that only he could maintain. They pressed against it, constantly, endlessly. Order seeking to freeze everything, chaos seeking to unravel it. Null waiting for both to fail. And Picard held them all at bay, alone, forever. At first, he searched for himself, for the man he had been, for the life he had lived, and slowly, he founded a timeline, one among infinite. The familiar hum of a starship, the steady glow of a viewscreen, the bridge of the Enterprise. There he was, another Jean-Luc Picard, his Picard, and yet not standing at the center of it all, giving orders, leading his crew, alive, unaware, real. Picard reached for it instinctively, but he couldn't touch it. He could see, he could feel, but he could not enter, because he was no longer part of any timeline. He was the space between them, the silence behind every moment. He watched as Riker laughed, as Data analyzed, as Worf stood vigilant, lives continuing, stories unfolding. Without him, a strange peace settled in, not happiness, not satisfaction, but understanding. This was the cost, not death, not destruction, but absence. To save existence, he had removed himself from it entirely. And yet, something unexpected happened. As he observed the timelines, he noticed something subtle. Tiny inconsistencies, small variations, not fractures, not instability, something else. Freedom. Moments where events didn't follow predictable paths, where outcomes diverged in ways that even he, holding all timelines, could not fully anticipate. At first, it confused him. Then, it intrigued him. Impossible, he thought. But the more he observed, the clearer it became. Even with him holding everything together, reality wasn't entirely controlled. Choice still existed. True choice, not predetermined by structure, not bound by certainty. Something within existence still resisted total understanding. A spark, a mystery. And for the first time since becoming the continuity, Picard felt something close to hope, because it meant one thing. He hadn't created a prison. He had preserved a possibility. The entity, the one that had guided him, appeared once more, faint but present, like a fading echo. "You see it now," it said. Picard's awareness turned toward it. "Yes," he replied. "It's not perfect." The entity shimmered softly. It was never meant to be. Picard considered the infinite timelines flowing through him. "The balance holds," he said. "For now," the entity replied. A pause. "They will test it. Order will press harder. Chaos will push further. Null will wait. Picard understood. This wasn't an ending. It was a responsibility, an eternal one. And me? He asked. What happens to me? The entity's light dimmed slightly. You endure. The simplicity of the answer carried its own weight. Picard accepted it, not with joy, but with purpose. The entity began to fade. I was the continuity before you, it said softly. Now, I am no longer needed. Picard felt a flicker of something gratitude. Perhaps, thank you, he said. The entity vanished, leaving him alone, truly alone. Time passed, or perhaps it didn't. For Picard, time was no longer a linear experience. Moments stretched, folded, repeated. Eternity wasn't endless duration. It was constant presence. And within that presence, he watched, he learned, he remembered. The Enterprise continued its mission. New captains rose, new conflicts emerged, new alliances formed. The Federation evolved sometimes toward peace, sometimes toward conflict, always moving, always changing. And Picard remained a silent guardian, a hidden force, a memory that no one remembered, until something happened, a small moment, almost insignificant, on a distant world, in a timeline among countless others. A child looked up at the stars. Do you think someone is watching over us? The child asked. Her parents smiled gently. Maybe, or maybe we're just figuring things out on our own. The child thought for a moment, then said something unexpected. I think someone helped us. Picard felt it, a ripple, a connection, not direct, not conscious, but real. A trace of his existence, echoing through the infinite. And for the first time in eternity, he didn't feel completely alone, because even if no one knew him, even if no one remembered, the universe he saved carried something of him within it, in every choice, in every possibility, in every moment of uncertainty. And as the timelines continued to unfold endless, unpredictable, alive, one truth became clear. Time had not been fixed. It had not been perfected. It had been set free. And in that freedom, the universe found something greater than order, and stronger than chaos. Meaning, the war across infinite timelines was over. But the story of existence, of choice, of change, of the unknown, had only just begun, and somewhere beyond time itself. Jean-Luc Picard watched it all, forever, silent, endless, and finally, at peace.